So it's Marvel Monday, and that means it's time for our latest episode of Journey to Marvel's Infinity War. Each week in 2018, I'm going to re-review one movie in the MCU leading up to Infinity War, except for next week, I'm actually going to be reviewing two movies. I'm going to do both Spider-Man Homecoming and Thor Ragnarok, but as for today, we are talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you are aware that my views on this movie are a little bit controversial. So I absolutely loved the first Guardians of the Galaxy. At different times when I've done my ranking of the MCU, it's been my number one. On multiple rankings, it has been the number one because I just love that movie. It has such a special place in my heart from when I first watched it. It's so rewatchable, so quotable. It has a very special place in my heart. So going into last year, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was my number one most anticipated movie of the year. Both because I loved the first one so much, the trailers had looked great, I was so excited going into that movie. And then if you've been watching my channel, you are aware I was less than thrilled with the movie that I ended up getting. And so it literally, of all, I've put out like 600 videos on my channel. By far, the most controversial thing I've ever talked about on my channel is my views on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I mean, I've been called every kind of imaginable name, idiot, stupid, retard, F you, everything imaginable because I didn't like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 enough. And when I initially reviewed it, I gave it a positive review. I gave it a thumbs up. I gave it essentially the equivalent of like a B minus 6.5 would be the equivalent of how I scored it with my current scoring system that I'm using. That's what I gave it. That wasn't good enough for a lot of people, so people were not so happy with me. So I've spent the last year debating people, arguing with people, and kind of my brain racking his mind around trying to figure out why is this a movie that didn't sit right with me, that I didn't enjoy it as much as so many other people, that I didn't enjoy the humor so much as other people, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. And then I've rewatched it 2 times this year already. One of them going into right before Black Panther came out. I rewatched it before doing that ranking video because I wanted to see, can I get a better score? I want this thing to go up. It would actually be good for me if I liked it more because less people get mad at me. I didn't like it more. I actually liked it less. And then I rewatched it again this week, and just every time I rewatch it, I see more things that bother me and I see fewer things that I enjoy about the film. Every single time. And so this video right here is kind of my definitive case for why I think this movie has some big issues, and none of this is meant as just a bashing the movie or anything like this. This is as someone that loves movies, loves the MCU, loves Guardians of the Galaxy, and so I want to take the movie seriously and examine why is it that this is a movie that didn't quite sit well with me. So before I get started, as I always say, tell me down below in the comment section, what did you think about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? Because I know a lot of you loved it, and I know a lot of you hated it, actually hated it, more so than me. This movie is very divisive, and I think there's a very simple reason for that. So with that to kind of transition, I'm going to move into dissecting the movie a little bit. I'm going to do this a little bit different. I'm going to start off talking about story structures in general. And I think one of the reasons this movie both kind of appeals to certain people more, and why it really doesn't sit well with other people goes to the actual nature of the story. So when it comes to stories, generally speaking, movies are plot-driven or character-driven. And in the world of comic book movies, action movies, the origin story. So a story based around an origin. So kind of let's look at each one of these. You have 3 acts, and I'm simplifying story structure for the sake of discussing it here because I can't, people have written books on this, so I'm giving the simplified version. You have 3 acts in a story. So with an origin story, Act 1, we see our character in normal life, and they transition into Act 2. Something happens where something changes them, so they start to become a hero. Or if it's a group movie like Guardians of the Galaxy or Avengers, something happens which brings our characters together. Our second act is them becoming the hero, or the team coming together. And the third act is them defeating the bad guys. So you can look at Iron Man 1, you see him in normal life, he's in the cave, that starts to change his life. Act 2 is him building the Iron Man suits, and then Act 3 is him taking on Ironmonger. You can look at the Avengers. At the beginning of the movie, they're all separate heroes. Loki arrives, so Nick Fury decides to assemble the Avengers. Act 2 is them coming together, trying to form a team, and then Act 3 is them stopping and defeating Loki. You can see kind of this origin story structure in there. This template also works fairly easily for a plot-driven movie. This is a movie where the main thing driving things forward is some sort of plot. Let's use Avengers again. Loki comes to Earth to defeat it. Nick Fury assembles the Avengers in Act 2. Act 3, they stop Loki. A conflict, an enemy, an antagonist is established at the beginning of the movie, so our heroes go on a journey to stop the bad guy from defeating them. And then that happens in the third act. You can take The Dark Knight. Batman is fighting crime. The Joker comes on the scene. So Act 2 is him trying to stop the Joker and having many ups and downs in the process. And then we go into the third act where he is defeated. But it's driven by the Joker shows up. Here's where it gets complicated. You have character-driven movies where it's not a plot device. It's not a plot thing that happens that calls our characters into action. It's character-driven. And so something about our characters has to be explored, and that's what drives the plot forward. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is a character-driven story. Almost all action movies, almost all disaster movies, almost all superhero movies are plot-driven. Tony Stark creates Ultron. The Avengers must stay together to defeat Ultron. But that's not what Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is. You look at Act 1, and what happens? Rocket has a character defect that causes him to be self-destructive, so he steals batteries. Therefore, the Sovereign are chasing our heroes. So the main antagonist in Act 1 are the Sovereign. You go into Act 2, our characters get split apart, and Star-Lord's hanging out with his dad, and we got Rocket and Yondu being taken captive, and so Taserface becomes our main antagonist in Act 2. That's where the conflict and action comes from. And our Yondu, like we have this whole thing with Yondu and his past coming to haunt him. It's all character-driven. And then we move into the third act, and we have a new main antagonist with Ego, who has a plot device that ties into the character, the origin of Star-Lord. This is all character-driven. It's such a different way to do a story. And so it's kind of interesting. As you look at it, each act has a different main villain. So I did a video 6 weeks ago about the MCU villains, and so many people left a comment. This guy said he's only going to talk about main villains, and then he talked about the Sovereign as his second entry. Right, because in my mind, you look at the movie, the inciting incident is Rocket steals batteries, and therefore the Sovereign are chasing them throughout the movie. This is what kind of leads to kind of Ego's appearance in it. The Sovereign are chasing them. This gets Yondu and his crew chasing down our heroes. This leads to a third act where the Sovereign are defeated. They're a main villain. You can build a case that the main villain of the second act is Taserface, and I should have included Taserface. Ego is not established as a villain in the movie until an hour and 20 minutes. He's not antagonistic, he's not a conflict, so the first hour and 20 minutes have conflict and drama because of other characters. Now, before I even go into evaluating whether it's good, bad, ugly, that's interesting. It's different. James Gunn decided to not follow conventional superhero plot structures, formulas, where you have Ego shows up wanting to conquer the universe and trying to recruit his son, and the Guardians of the Galaxy must stop him. That would be a traditional storytelling, but that's not the way this story works. That's not the way the plot works. There's really not a way to easily summarize the plot of this movie and say, when X happens, the Guardians must Y to stop Z. There's no simple formula to describe it. It's just Guardians in Galaxy faced a series of villains that challenge who they are and who they're trying to be, and they discover they're a family in the end. Like, it's very character-driven. That's what makes this movie so interesting and difficult to evaluate based on the normal ways we discuss these types of movies. Even if you talk about, is Ego a good villain? Well, I have my issues with him, but other people say he's so great because of all these different types of reasons that are very different from the way you would describe Ultron, who's an antagonist throughout a movie. Very different from the way you would describe Loki, who's an antagonist throughout a movie. Ego, only really the antagonist in the third act of the movie. And the reason I have to go into so much detail on this is because I can commend James Gunn for what he was trying to do. And I can say that's very cool. And at the same time say, I'm not so sure that I liked it. And I think that goes to a lot of the reasons why a lot of us had problems with this movie. He tried something different that I don't think works very well for this genre. It works well with dramas. It can work well with romantic comedies. It works well for movies like 500 Days of Summer. Lots of movies like that where it's all about a person kind of going through normal life. I don't know that it works well with a movie that's supposed to have people shooting at each other to create a conflict that's exciting to see us overcome. So with all that discussion of story and what makes this movie very unique and maybe the most character-driven story in the entire MCU, from there let's move on to just discussing the good, the mixed, and the bad. Starting off with the good, because this movie's character-driven, the best thing about this movie is that it has some great, amazing character moments. A lot of that going to Yondu, where they took a character that was really interesting, quirky, and very cool, funny in the first movie, and they found a way to give him a really deep backstory and understanding the nature and dynamic of his relationship with Star-Lord, why it's so complex, and showing him as a guy that the choices he's made have consequences to him. And this works as a very nice mirror to Rocket, who's, the much younger version of him that's so destructive. And there's all these amazing moments between the two of them that lead to, in certain senses, this movie has just such a U-turn, drastic change of character for Yondu, but this movie gives us so many just really heartfelt moments of him in reflection, him seeing himself in other people, him seeing just how evil ego is and what's going on, that it earns the sacrifice at the end. It earns this really powerful emotional ending for him. And that's really powerful character type stuff. Likewise, and there you get to these moments with Rocket and how destructive, insane he is with all the wackiness that he goes through. You get some great moments with Drax and this weird thing with Mantis where he's picking on her, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but also forming this weird friendship with her as this is his new family. The people he's meeting here, this is who are the people that he's going to do life with moving forward. And so in his own weird Drax ways, relating to people. So even as I find some of it distasteful, there's a really emotional, powerful connection in a lot of what's going on there. You go through some story development with Gamora, Nebula, of course, Star-Lord with his family. There's so much there to potentially just learn who they are and why they are the way they are. From there, let's move on to the next positive. It's a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. There's a lot of funny moments. James Gunn, in this movie in particular, I mean, he's just kind of throwing things at left, right, shotgun style, going for the humor here. And so whatever you might have liked about the first movie with the humor, you'll find something funny in this movie because he tries so many different things, whether you like the dancing stuff, you like the quippy pop culture reference to 80s things, if you like Drax's dry, blunt version of communicating. You got cool Kurt Russell joining in on this one. There's a bunch of different things. It throws it all out there. Another thing, we'll talk about the humor and the negatives as well, but there's a lot of really, really funny moments. You can't fault this movie in regards to trying to entertain. This movie, he went for everything. Every idea he had, he just threw it in there, threw it up on screen, and for some people, all of it worked, and so they love this movie. For me, there's a lot of things I really enjoyed and a lot of things I wasn't so crazy about. Next one we'll talk about, it's a Guardians movie, so we've got an amazing soundtrack of 70s and 80s rock hits, some punk in there, and it's like soul at times. I mean, he just finds that way to find those songs that you're not expecting. I heard some people like, what songs do you want to hear in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? And people like throwing out, I want Bon Jovi, I want Guns N' Roses. I was like, no, that's not James Gunn. He's not going for the obvious hits. He's finding those ones that you're not thinking about. That's what makes the soundtrack to them so good. And he does that once again here, finds ways to incorporate them into the mix a little bit. So we've got yet another amazing soundtrack. Another great thing about this movie is they found, once again, another great batch of legacy actors to work into the movie. So Kurt Russell, he is endlessly cool. It's amazing to see him in here. More importantly for me though, Kurt Russell, awesome. But we got Stallone. Stallone might be my favorite actor of all time, and he's now in the MCU. And I sure hope where this movie is setting up that we get him as a major part in the next movie, or he gets his own spin-off. And because you saw that his crew at the end, and I mean, you got, was it Ving Rhames in there? I think you had Michelle Yeoh, Michael Rosenbaum's one of those guys. That sounds amazing. Whether that's like the people the Guardians team up with in the next movie, whatever they're going to do with that, I hope they do something incredible with that, because that was so cool to work so many people in with the sort of backstory they're doing there. And you got Tango and Cash reunion in the movie because of Kurt Russell and Stallone, and then you've also got a cliffhanger reunion with Michael Rooker and Stallone. So a bunch of things like that put a big, gigantic grin on my face. With that said, now we're going to move on to the negatives on this one. When it comes to the bad with this movie, it boils down to two big things and a third thing that's kind of an offshoot of the second one. So the first big problem is the story, and the second one is the tone, and the offshoot one related to tone is the mean streak running throughout the movie, which very much comes from the tone that it's going for. To kind of illustrate this, let's use the illustration of a meal. When it comes to a meal, the actual ingredients, that's like the story. So steak, potatoes, green beans. That's the story. And when we talk about, are they good ingredients? Are they cooked well? That's when a story, that's like the actual meat to it. The tone is like the seasoning put on top of it. And so we want a consistent tone. We want consistent seasoning. We don't want teriyaki steak with Cajun mashed potatoes and curry on top of the vegetables. Like, you don't want random spices on everything. You want it to taste like one cook made an Asian meal, made a Cajun meal, Mexican food. Like, we want it to taste like one thing. Good ingredients, cooked properly, all with the same seasoning to it. And when I think about this movie, it feels to me like a bunch of jumbled ingredients that don't go together, seasoned by a bunch of different people. That's what I take this movie as, kind of to me. And I think that's why some of you like this movie. And I can tell you all the reasons I don't like it, but what you'll do is you'll go, but I love this teriyaki chicken. The teriyaki chicken here is delicious, and those mashed potatoes are delicious. So you can take the individual aspects of it, the humor, the character moments, and you go, it's so funny. This moment was so powerful, and that's good enough for you with the way you consume the movie. And I'm not faulting you. I'm not saying you're right and I'm wrong, or you're wrong and I'm right. I'm just saying that's the way you're taking it. And I look at it and I go, these ingredients don't go together, and they feel like they're like seasoned totally differently, and that doesn't work for me. Maybe it works for you. It doesn't work for me. So with that said, I'll kind of dive into each one of these. The story on this movie, I view it as kind of having three main storylines, two really key storylines, and that's Rocket steals the batteries from the Sovereign, therefore the Sovereign are chasing the Guardians, which splits up our team because the ship kind of crashes down. Once they crash down, Ego picks them up, and that starts our second main story, Star-Lord and Ego. Third main storyline being Yondu and his crew and Taserface and the antagonism in there. So those are kind of our three main storylines. I don't mind, like the one with Taserface, in and of itself, the storyline I think is good. The other two storylines I think have serious problems to them. Because we're watching a movie that's a superhero movie, comic book movie, where we want our Guardians to guard the galaxy. And what's our main starting plot line? That's the inciting incident. One of our heroes steals something, so the antagonist is angry and tracking down our heroes. For me, that's not a compelling story, because I tune into these movies to see heroes do good things. And they can have faults, like you can see Iron Man, or Tony Stark in Iron Man 3 gives away his address. That's a stupid thing to do. That's a character defect, but it's because bad things happened and he's in the process of trying to take out bad guys, and his character defect makes him do something stupid. Here, one of our heroes just being stupid, putting the Sovereign on their track to kill them, and putting all of our heroes in danger is not a compelling superhero story. It's not a compelling epic adventure to be on to watch Guardians guard the galaxy, because they're not. Rocket's the bad guy. The Sovereign aren't the bad guys. Now, they're the antagonists because by the nature of the story, the perspective we're seeing it is the Guardians of the Galaxy, but they were stolen from, and we knew the way they behave when they're stolen from, so they're not really villains. So that's not compelling to me. And then our second one, the Ego plotline, I don't think it works as a plotline because of the way they decided to tell it, which is to say, we're going to hold off throughout the first act and the second act, all the way until we're turning into the third act to reveal that this is a conflict and this is a storyline, which is to say Ego wants to kill everyone and rule the universe with the sun. This isn't revealed until we're going to that third act. So as we're going through the movie, we're not thinking, how are we going to stop Ego? How are we going to save the galaxy? We're going through the movie, learning about this relationship, his history, the past, Sovereign are out there, Taserface is trying to cause trouble, and then we have this big reveal. Suddenly, we have to have a third act boss fight. So as soon as it's revealed, the movie goes into like a 30-minute long boss fight with Ego, where there, all sorts of stuff's going on. They got to blow a bomb up. The Sovereign show up in the middle of it, and then Star-Lord's putting rocks on his fists and stuff. And it's just kind of out of the blue. It doesn't feel like our heroes have been working hard to overcome this. It's just, boom, we're right there in the middle of a story. There's no story in it. Like, that's the problem. There's no actual big story with the Ego one. It's just Ego gives a bunch of exposition that's half false. Then he gives true exposition, and we fight him. That's so thin on story with the way they chose to do it. So thin. So I don't find Ego compelling at all. Doesn't matter how evil he is and all that stuff. He's not compelling. Also, the problem with this movie is because the main inciting incident isn't like a bad guy we're actually trying to overcome. We're just trying to get away from. We're just trying to survive being around them. And we don't learn about Ego's plan until the very end. The movie has no main plot that we're like, there's no antagonism throughout the movie that we're wanting our heroes to overcome. They're just reacting to things happening to them. They're on the run. Taserface shows up. Oh no, we just found out Ego's a bad guy. We better stop him. It's all reactionary. They're not proactively trying to defeat a bad guy. They're not seeing a problem and chasing it. And so they feel like reactive characters where things are happening to them. And once again, in a story like this, that's not compelling. And that is the exact reason why most comic book movies, action movies, are plot driven. Something bad happens and our heroes have to go into action. Here, it's reactionary. It's all character based. It gave us those great character moments. I don't think they work at all for this type of movies. That's problem number one, is our story. Second one is the tone. And what I mean by the tone is, like I said, it's that spicing on the top. And maybe you like sweet things, and maybe you like spicy things, maybe you like bitter things. There's all these different types of flavors, but you need it to be consistent. And this movie, I feel, is just so all over the place with its tone. So you get to the opening sequence, the credits start rolling, and you've got Groot dancing all around as the music's playing, and it's basically self-parody is what's going on. Like, it's so far into goofy, it's self-parody. Because it makes no sense if it's not that. Where you've got a character dancing around while people are flying around all around him. And this goes kind of throughout the whole movie, where in the middle of the climax of the movie, they got David Hasselhoff shows up, and he goes like, all right, maybe you want me to be David Hasselhoff. Things like that happen. You have characters jumping through, do hyperspace jumps, and it goes into like Looney Tune mode, and their faces are being warped and contorted all around the place. And so you've got things that are straight up goofy, cartoony, and self-parody. And then at the same time, this movie is perhaps the darkest of the movies in the MCU. You've got Baby Groot being tortured, where adults are like pouring things on him. You have Yondu's crew being released into space while people are laughing. It's not just that people are killed. It's not that bad guys kill people. The way it plays out is people are laughing as people are in agony. There's a way to present bad guys shooting people where it's like, a bad guy killed a guy. And then there's aliens that are humanoids laughing. There's a cruelty, a mean streak inside of that as they're watching it. This is a movie that has prolicide. I didn't just know that word. Prolicide. That's a father killing his own children. Thousands of them. And the movie presents that immediately after doing Looney Tunes cartoony stuff with people's faces being bent around. And like that's side by side with seeing the dead corpses of Ego's children that he's murdered. And it's a movie with patricide. I did know that word. And that's a child killing their parent. These are the darkest things we've seen in the entire MCU. And it's side by side with goofy dancing Baby Groot, David Hasselhoff showing up, and people's faces being contorted. that is eating, ghost pepper spicy food next to, jelly beans, next to bitter tea. I mean, it's just all over the place. It's not consistent and it doesn't feel like it mixes quite right. But when you've got literally cartoon faces next to a dad killing his children, that's so uneven. And then I've alluded to this, but there's just a real strong mean streak in this movie. As I said, tortured baby Groot, Yondu's crew being murdered while people are laughing and people are watching their friends dying. It's just presented in such a way that's just such a punch to the gut. Like, ugh, this is nasty. You have Drax insulting Mantis's appearance to her face as she clearly looks like her feelings are hurt by what he's saying. And it goes on. And so the joke is powerful, strong man making fun of her girl. Now, obviously, part of the other joke is that he's not supposed to be this big, handsome guy either. Ha 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 ha. But at the inherent nature of it, we're laughing at a girl's appearance. Like, there's a meanness in it that's very off-putting. And if it was that alone, it might be okay. But you have all these other elements to it. And then the one that makes this movie just so distasteful kind of in my mouth, the nature of the movie is Star-Lord finally meets his dad that he's been wanting to meet, figure out what's been going on. He finally learns why he's important. He learns his place in the universe. And then he discovers that his dad is a sociopath that killed his mom. And so he's forced to decide, do I have a dad or would everyone die? So easily he chooses, I don't want everyone to die. So the movie creates a scenario where an orphan gets a dad that wants to play catch with him. He discovers he has powers and teaches him how to use those powers. So he has significance, he has power, and then it creates a scenario where he has to kill, as an orphan that just got his dad back, he has to kill his own father, sacrifice the powers that make him special, and then we introduce this Yondu character that he's known all along, but realizes the full perspective, and he sees him in a new light, and he goes, that's been my daddy all along, and then it takes him away too. So as we have the moment of victory at the end of the movie, our main villain is killed and we've guarded the galaxy. It comes at the cost of an orphan gaining two dads and both of them dying. And discovering, like, the movie glosses over, never really soaks in the fact that Star-Lord, it's not just that Ego killed a bunch of his own children. Star-Lord had hundreds or thousands of siblings. He just learned that they exist. And his own father killed them. And his own father killed his mother. That's so dark. That's so heavy to put on an orphan story. And like, I just see that and I go, I don't like this. Maybe like, I don't like Meatloaf at all. Maybe you like Meatloaf. Maybe to you it's like, oh man, this is the way, this is perfect. A meal about an orphan going through this journey so that he can discover, oh, the Guardians are my real family after all. I don't like that. I don't like Meatloaf, and I don't like that story. And I might like really spicy food, but some of this was like eating a ghost pepper. I don't want to eat a straight ghost pepper. I just want food seasoned really spicy. Like, I get why a lot of you think it's really funny. I get why some of you think it has great character moments. To me, it's not something I enjoy at all. It's not one that I want to rewatch. It's probably, of all the movies in the MCU, this is the one that I enjoy rewatching the least because the story is so off-putting to me. From there, I've got a few more kind of issues with the movie. Some of the humor, I think, feels very forced. Like the dancing Groot at the beginning felt far too much like a callback to the previous movie that was trying too hard to be a cutesy thing like the post-credit dancing Groot thing. I don't think the David Hasselhoff stuff works at all. It feels like they're trying to create a new Kevin Bacon, a new Footloose, and so then they wanted to put David Hasselhoff in it, and it felt like it's trying too hard. And there's just several things like that where it just felt like it was trying a little bit too hard to call back to something before. Some of the stuff where like Drax was like, there's two types of people in the world, those that dance and those that don't. And I was like, this is a little bit cringy. Even in the trailer, I loved some of this, most everything in the trailers. When that line was in the trailer, I was like, ooh, that's a little bit too callbacky for me. I'm not crazy about what you're doing there. Also, the second thing, I thought the Nebula stuff was pretty awful. Like when you're the first time I watched the movie and Nebula comes out of nowhere like shooting at Gamora, I was like, this is so far into self-parody and just ridiculousness that I'm being pulled out of the movie. Like, I can't believe I'm watching something what I'm watching right now. And then as that happens, they have a chat right afterwards and they join teams. It's like, I don't think that worked at all. Then when I rewatched it right before Black Panther, I'd forgotten that happened so abruptly. And when it happened, I was like, oh my goodness, this is the worst thing in this movie. And there's a bunch of issues I have with this movie, and this is the biggest problem I have with it is the most individual thing. This moment right here is it. You know, I mentioned before kind of the self-parody side to it. Even the way the Sovereign are done, they are using like drones, and so their characters are playing 80s video games, going, pew, 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 doing literally 80s video game sound effects. Like stuff like that, it just pulls me so far out of the movie because it's not really consistent with the rest of the MCU because it's so self-referential, pop culture-y in a self-parody kind of way. Final thing to talk about on this one, the third act draws out way too long for me. It just feels like CGI mess kind of going on in a non-artistic way. Like Doctor Strange is jam-packed with CGI, but it's artistically done and like kaleidoscope type stuff, where here it's just CGI planet with CGI ships and CGI ego and CGI Chris Pratt punches CGI Kurt Russell, and it's just CGI noise to me. It's not compelling, so that sequence is just exhausting in how long it goes on. So those are my problems with the movie. Some big, some small, some of them at the core of the movie itself, and some of them just me nitpicking a couple details in there. Given that I have issues at the core of this movie, I've got to give it a C, unfortunately. I think that this movie has the biggest story issues of any movie in the MCU, more so even than Iron Man 2. This has story issues, but there's still some great character moments, and there's some great humor in it as well. So I go a 6.5 on entertainment. There's some things in there that taste good to me still. I can recommend it on the entertainment side. On the storytelling side, I do not think it's a good movie storytelling-wise at all. So that's my take on it. For MCU Connections, I'm going to go real quick on this one. The only thing I'm really going to mention, even though there's other stuff just because this video is already over long, is in the post-credit sequence, Adam Warlock is coming from the Sovereign. Some people tried to use that as a defense of the Sovereign, like when I said I didn't like the Sovereign as villain, so like, you must not have seen the post-credit scene. The Sovereign are bringing Adam Warlock. It's like, okay, but that doesn't make them good villains in this movie. That means maybe they did something important to make the next movie better, but this movie, still not compelling in what they were trying to do. So anyway, there's my take on the movie. There's my one MCU connection I'm going to mention. Tell me your stuff you enjoy down in the comment section. With that said, I know a ton of you guys love this movie, and a lot of you guys agree with me as well that the movie has big issues. Here's what you guys had to say using the Stardust app.
How can you not really like this movie? Overall, this is a really fun continuation of characters that you know to love from the first one.
I actually enjoyed this movie better than the first one.
It was a blast. It's disappointing compared to the first, but I still had a fun time.
Another disappointing movie of 2017 is Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
It's just as good as the first one, maybe even better. It is just a great film from start to finish.
It is a great movie.
Really great movie. Saw it in theaters once. The humor's great. The characters are great. However, the villain, Ego, is kind of like, what?
An excellent soundtrack, awesome soundtrack, I would say. But it's not as good as the original. I still prefer the original over this one. But I had a good time at the theater.
I love the music. I love the humor. I love the villain.
So I love this movie. It's funny, and it can hit hard at the same time. You know, the cast interacts with each other really well. Marvel always does that well.
I didn't like what they did in the beginning, how they kind of made Rocket and Peter almost hate each other, and they separated the Guardians for the first hour of the movie.
It's not quite as good as the first Guardians. Some of the humor felt a little forced, a little misplaced in parts.
I think that they really did kind of fail with the humor this time around.
It's still good. Not as great as the first movie, but it's good. It's because the jokes sometimes go a little too far, or they just drag on. But
the comedy works some of the time, but other times it just kind of falls flat. It goes overboard. The humor is kind of forced more than the original.
I like Ego as the villain a lot.
Kurt Russell is amazing as the villain.
Ego, he's a much better villain. You understand why he does the things he does.
The villain, Ego, his whole storyline is just not very compelling.
Bad guy Ego wasn't really that interesting.
The villain isn't the best. Once again, Ego is not the best villain.
The only thing that I didn't really like was the Sovereign. It just felt like that they didn't really need to be there.
And the gold people, I just didn't find interesting enough.
It would have been better if the gold people were more memorable and if the second act wasn't so slow, but
it is good. I love Yondu in this. He's one of my favourite anti-heroes, sort of.
Specifically Yondu. Yondu is awesome in this movie.
Yondu's my favorite character in this entire film.
But overall, all the character arcs are just great, and there's just some really touching emotional moments in.
So there you have it. I guess this is probably going to be the longest episode of Journey to Marvel's Infinity War, by quite a bit. But this is the one I had to talk about the most, and the one that I've debated the most. This had to be my definitive case for Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is kind of a total mess, in my opinion. Hey, if you want to appear in one of my future videos, it's really simple. All you have to do is download the Stardust app. You can get it at the link down below for your Android or Apple phone. And once you download it, all you have to do, follow me first. Follow me as soon as you get it. Sean Chandler is my name. You can see it right there on that card right there. And then once you do a reaction, up in the right-hand corner, there's a little like plus hand sign. Click on that, type in my name. That tags me in the video. It shows up in my feed so I can actually see that you want to appear in a future video, and I can see your thoughts on things, and you can appear in a future video. With that said, thank you so much for watching this very long video talking about a movie that I've spent a long time discussing, and I'm sure I'm going to spend a lot more time discussing after this video. With that said, if you're new to my channel, you picked an interesting first video, but thank you guys so much for watching, and please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos. The key thing, though, is I don't want to just talk about movies. I want to talk about movies with you. So join me down in the comment section. Let's have a lively, respectful conversation about this very divisive movie that I have a lot to say about, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. And as always, thank you for watching.